Woohoo! Welcome back. Today we're working with absolute values in equations. And we're going to start right off the bat with one that is a big, wait, what? Example, which is number 4. So let's take a look. 2 times the absolute value of x plus 4 equals negative 3. Now, if you start doing your homework and you end up doing like just boom, 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 you do a bunch of these, then hopefully you're going to look at this and you're going to say, okay, I need to isolate the absolute value, which is fine. So we're going to take both sides and we're going to divide by 2. So then we get to the point where we have isolated the absolute value. So the absolute value of x plus 4 equals negative 3/2. Now, if you've gotten into the rhythm of doing these, then you could possibly miss something. And so here, I'm going to go with my beautiful, beautiful red pen here with a big red arrow and say, what? Whoa. That was terrible. Scooby-Doo deserves better. But that's actually fine because Sharktopus doesn't get to see a lot of Scooby-Doo. Doesn't realize that was a terrible take on Scooby-Doo. Okay, but there's a negative. Can an absolute value equal a negative number? And the answer is no. This is impossible. In other words, if I put any number in for x, I'm going to end up with a number. X plus 4 will equal some number. Then the absolute value of that number will either be 0 or a positive number. Could it be negative 3/2? No. You can't get a minus out of an absolute value. It does not matter what x is. So, and that's part of what makes absolute values somewhat frustrating, is because you could keep doing what we were doing before, split it into 2 halves, end up with some answers, plug them in, and you would not notice until the check that something had gone really wrong. Now, should I stop right at the beginning and say absolute value can never equal a negative? The answer is, well, you need to make sure you get to the point where you've isolated the absolute value. It's all by itself. If the absolute value equals a negative number, there's no possible answer. So if you have absolute value and that's equal to a negative, sorry, Sharktopus, that's no solution. Woohoo! That's the general rule. So you got to keep your wits about you. You got to pay attention. Okay, let's go on. And people often ask, students in class will be like, what do you mean, we're done? And the answer is, yeah, this isn't possible. We don't need to go and do any more detailed work. Save your strength. This is not going to have an answer no matter how much algebra you do. So we just stop there. We say, okay, no answer there. Let's move on. Dun, dun, dun. Of course, moving on means we've got to deal with this. And again, what I said in the previous video, it's going to hold. You want to work with absolute value as if it's another kind of variable. So in other words, you've got this absolute value times 4 plus 2. What do we want to do? We want to isolate absolute value. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2 from both sides. So far, so good? And then what's the next step? Well, I've got 4 times this absolute value equals 1. As much as I hate to do it because, fractions, I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 4. So then I end up with x minus 3 in absolute value equals 1/4. And again, this whole process was to isolate the absolute value. Okay, so we isolate the absolute value. Once we get to this stage, oh no, I'm taking you to Smearytown. Sorry about that. Once we get to the absolute value equals some number. Now, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and be brave and leave it as 1/4. You do have options. If this is the kind of fraction that can be written as a decimal exactly, like this would be 0.25, and you would like to work with that, go ahead and switch it over to 0.25. Again, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as a fraction because sometimes you just don't have that choice. But if you want to go ahead and go to decimals, go for it. Okay, I'm going to set this up just like I did before. The first one, the one that I do first is always going to be the one where it's positive 1/4. I just get rid of the absolute value. Or x minus 3 equals negative 1/4. Now, in both cases, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And now, there's a lot of things you can do. I could say 1/4 plus 3 is 3 1/4, which is a mixed number. And that is a perfectly reasonable mixed number. Or it's possible that the problem may ask me to write it as an improper fraction, which would be 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13/4. It just really depends. A lot of times you've got the choice, sometimes you don't. And then over on the other side, I've got x minus 3 equals negative 1/4. This one's going to be a little bit more painful because x equals 3 minus 1/4. So if you happen to know how to do that, for example, if you do a lot of baking, 3 cups minus 1/4 cup, you may know off the top of your head. But if you don't, we're going to have to come up with a clever way to deal with this. I'm going to write 3 as 12/4 minus 1/4 is 11/4. Now, I happen to also know that equals 2 3/4. So you can write it as a mixed number. So far, so good? Okay, now, dun dun dun. You know what's coming next. Deep breath. Let's go ahead and check these. Now, I know these are not going to be the most fun thing to check. And again, if you would rather deal with this as 3.25 and 2.75, go for it. I'm going to go ahead and check. Now, remember, whenever you check, always start with the original form of the equation because it may have already gone sideways by the time you get the answer. So you want to check in the original. Okay, first example, I'm going to go with 13/4. Oof. And then I'm going to say that that equals 3 1/4. I'm going to switch it to the mixed number. Again, these two are equal, so I can replace one with the other. Let me show you why I think the mixed number is going to be easier. This is a pretty hideous problem. However, it's doable. And you'll notice here, if I write it, instead of writing as 13/4, if I write as 3 1/4, when I subtract 3, all that I have there left is 1/4. So, and here's the left side. What's the absolute value of 1/4? Well, the absolute value of 1/4 is just 1/4, right? Positive numbers, even if their fractions, are unchanged. So I'm going to do something kind of sneaky. I take the absolute value and I rewrite it as parentheses to let myself know, oh, I already used the absolute value. Now, if it makes you happy, if it makes it make more sense, and you put a plus there to remind yourself, see, absolute value makes the positive one, then go for it. You don't have to, but it's an option. Okay, what is 4 times 1/4? Well, 4 times 1/4 Hopefully you're already saying, oh, I know that, but just in case you're not, the 4's cancel and you get 1 plus 2 equals 3. Oh my goodness. Oh, how wonderful. This one is checked. So now I want to stop here because this is just checking one of them. I'm going to go ahead and check the second answer. However, there is a point at which if you're taking a test or you're turning in some work and you're facing a deadline or you're honestly very exhausted, it may not be worth it to you to check an answer. That's up to you. Checking is nice because that way you can confirm, okay, yeah, I got the correct answer. And if you're doing this like in a test where you have lots of time, I would go ahead and do it. But if you are down to the wire, I would not put time into the check unless you think there's a good chance that you'll be able to find an error. Because the reality of it is, when the check is this complicated, a lot of times people make a mistake in the check, if that makes sense. So again, checks, generally a good idea, but sometimes people choose not to. I'm not sure I'm going to have enough room, but I'm going to try so I don't end up with lots and lots of papers. Our other option was x equals 11/4 or 2 3/4. And I'm going to plug it into the original. Now, since I've already done some of this work, I already know that 2 3/4 minus 3 is actually a negative 1/4. Now, if you're not sure about that, you can always write it out instead of the mixed numbers. You can always write it out as improper fractions and see that you get a negative 1/4. If that makes sense. So I've got 4 times the quantity absolute value of negative 1/4 plus 2. Now, what is the absolute value of negative 1/4? It's the same thing as the absolute value of positive 1/4. Notice we're getting the same thing. Oh no! I got so excited by the same thing, I dropped my pen. I know, absolute value. What is more exciting, honestly? Sharktopus, what do you think? Yeah, I agree. Totally exciting. So I've got 4 times 1/4. I've used the absolute value to make this positive, so the absolute value is used up. It's absolute value is a one-use situation. You use it, and it's gone. Okay. So in that way, it's disposable. So I don't know. I don't know what the effects are on the environment. It seems like it's kind of toxic in math tests. So, be careful with its use. Don't let children just come and pick up absolute value and play with it. Because, it's exciting when kids are finding math, but, you want to make sure they're being safe. Okay, 4 times 1/4 is still, like above, is still 1. I get 1 plus 2, and that's equal to 3. And I know it's all convoluted because I had to change. I was trying to use all the paper that I had. It checks. And so I feel like I should do something like, wake up, everyone. I've made it through the check on number 5. Woohoo! So, please ask me questions if you have questions about this. This is truly hideous. Honestly, I admit, that is hideous. So let's go ahead and let's put this behind us and try one more problem. And then, dun dun dun! Ooh, and you can kind of see what's going to happen next behind there. It's very exciting. It's kind of like, spoilers. Number 6. Wow. Number 6 is the battle of the absolute values. So I'm going to cover this up and say, don't think about that. What I want to ask you is, how many signs are there? And I want to convince you that in terms of sign, there are positive numbers and there are negative numbers. and there are zeros, right? That's it. If two absolute values are equal to each other, oh no, oh drat. It'll just be artistic. If two absolute values are equal to each other, then either, let me look at an example. If I have the absolute value of 7, that equals 7. If I have the absolute value of -7, that also equals 7. So far, so good. What are the possibilities? I could have, if I have two absolute values, I could have them both being positive. I could have the first one be negative and the second one be positive. Absolute value of -7 equals the absolute value of 7. Yes, it does. I could have the first one be positive and the second one is negative, right? Because absolute value of 7 equals absolute value of -7, and I could have them both be negative. So if I know the answer is 7s, then I know that either the 7s match, both are positive 7 or both are negative, or one's negative and one's positive. Those are the only possibilities. And I know some of you are looking at me like, what? What is even happening? Who said anything about 7? This is just an example. Maybe not a helpful example, but let me move on. So if you have an absolute value set equal to an absolute value, and you've got, let me come up with some beautiful pictures. You've got a lovely purple square equal to a lovely yellow circle. Can you see that? Okay. There are two possibilities. Either the lovely purple square get this set up. Either the lovely purple square is exactly the same as the yellow circle. So these two possibilities, 7 and 7, or -7 and -7, so they match. Either the purple square and the yellow circle equal each other, or the purple square is the opposite of the yellow circle. That would be these two situations where one is negative and one is positive. What does this all mean? It means that if you have 2x minus 3 in absolute value, and that equals x plus 5 in absolute value, you still only have two possibilities, believe it or not. Either 2x minus 3 equals x plus 5, or 2x minus 3 equals the opposite of x plus 5. So in fact, it looked like it was going to be really scary and horrible, but in fact, we're back to these two options. Now, you could ask me, why did I put the minus on the right-hand side? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. You could put the minus on the left-hand side too. Just don't do both. You have to pick one. Basically, these two have to be opposites, and then these two are exactly the same. They match, they're equal. I put it on the right because that's how I learned it. And my guess is that many of you will do it that way too, because that's the way I'm presenting it. So let's take a look. If I've got 2x minus 3 equals x plus 5, okay, well, I move the x, right? Subtract x from both sides. Woohoo, x minus 3 equals 5. Add 3 to both sides. Woohoo. X equals 8. Okay. Not too bad. And what's this one? Well, this one I have one extra step because I've got to figure out what the opposite is. The opposite of x minus 5. So I'm going to add x to both sides. I get 3x minus 3 equals negative 5. I add 3 to both sides. Okay, I'm not thrilled because I've got a negative 2. And so x equals negative 2/3. What do you think? Kind of woohoo? But what's my answer? X equals negative 2/3 or x equals 8. Again, 2 answers. Okay, so now let's go ahead and check. And again, this may be one of those ones where you, for example, when I'm giving tests in person, which at the time of this recording, I'm not giving tests in person, but in my in-person tests, I gave points for checking. And you might look at these two and say, okay, I'll check just the 8. I won't check the fraction because I don't have time for that. Or you choose to check them both. Checking is important because it's how we make sure, you haven't made any mistakes. Okay, let's try it. So x equals 8. Not too bad. X equals 8. I'm going to plug 8 in on the left. I've got 2 times 8 minus 3. Does that, in absolute value, does that equal absolute value of 8 plus 5? So I'm going to go over here. I've got absolute value of 16 minus 3. That's the absolute value of 13, which is 13. So far, so good. Over here, 8 plus 5 inside the absolute value is the absolute value of 13, which is 13. Oh my goodness. They're equal. Woohoo. That check was pretty straightforward. Now, the other value for x was a negative 2/3. I feel like this one I should do as ASMR or something so that you all can just gently fall asleep while I'm doing this. Okay, you guys ready? Woohoo. 2 times the opposite of 2/3 minus 3 in absolute value, is that equal to negative 2/3 plus 5? So this is going to be working with a lot of fractions. What you might want to do is start on the right because it looks a little easier. I'm going to write this out as negative 2/3 plus, and I have to write 5 as thirds. I multiply top and bottom by 3, and I get that 5 is 15/3. So that's negative 2 plus 15 all over 3, all in absolute value, so that's 13/3. So the whole thing equals 13/3. So I'm hoping that the left-hand side is also going to give me 13/3. So let's see. So first I've got 2 times negative 2/3. So that's going to be negative 4/3 minus 3 in absolute value. Now this is making me nervous because I got a bunch of negatives, but I'm reminded that this is inside absolute value, which means that it's going to end up positive. So, phew. When you multiply by 2, you multiply top to top, so we get negative 4/3. Over here, I've got 3. So let's see, right here, I will do 3 over 1 equals what over 3? Multiply top and bottom by 3, I get 9/3. So this is negative 4/3 minus 9/3, all inside of absolute value. So I get negative 4 minus 9 all over 3. So that's negative 13/3 inside absolute value, which is positive 13/3. Oh my goodness, look at that. Now, the interesting thing to notice is before absolute value, this was the negative, the opposite of this. So these are opposites, whereas the first answer was that they matched exactly. Okay, so those of you who fell asleep, you can wake back up. It's safe. This is the check for, I should write check. I'll write it up at the top. Check. Wasn't too terrible. Well, maybe it was a little terrible, but hopefully not too terrible. And the good news is this part of the video is over. Woohoo! So for the next video, we're going to come back in and do all of this, but with inequalities, which is just like, wow, this is going to be so much fun. I know, y'all can't wait. So take a little break, be good to yourself. Get, a little nap, something good to drink, maybe some protein, some vegetables, a little exercise, a little art, some music, some dancing, go out and see friends if that's an option, some fresh air, or, enjoy the darkness as I will. And know that you're awesome. Woohoo. And math on.